Hello, welcome everyone. You should see my Sketchpad screen, which right now looks like an empty window with nothing on it. Again, my name is Josephine Noah. I work here at Key Curriculum Press. I'm also a former high school math teacher here in Berkeley, California. Our webinar today is about beginning Sketchpad constructions. So this webinar is intended for beginners, people who have no or very little experience with Sketchpad, although if you do have some experience, I expect you'll probably learn a couple of new things as we go along. I'm going to be focusing on some geometry and some algebra applications. And when I say that I'm focusing on construction, I mean I'm starting from this blank screen here, and I'm doing construction. So with Sketchpad, as well as our other softwares, we do have a lot of pre-made sketches and pre-made models that you can use to explore ideas, but it's also nice to know how to start from scratch and just get going. So I'm going to start with a poll about your level of experience with Sketchpad, because I would like to know who the audience is that I'm dealing with so that I can address your needs best. So I just opened a poll. You should see the question, what's your level of experience with Sketchpad? Never used it, beginning, intermediate, advanced. If you could take a quick second and vote, I would appreciate that. Okay, we're up to 90%. I'll give you another couple seconds. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll and share the results. Can you see that? Andres, can you see that?
Yes, I can. I can see it just fine. Sorry, I just had myself. Yeah, I was just muted.
Okay. Okay, good. So 14% have never used Sketchpad at all, 59% beginning, 26% intermediate. Sorry. Okay, that is great. And let me now do one other poll. I would like to know what mathematics grade level you teach or that you focus on. I expect some of you are probably teachers of teachers at the college level, but if you could tell me what you focus on, that would be great. Elementary, middle, high school, or if you're explicitly a high school level, a college level mathematics teacher, that would be great too. Okay, so mostly high school. Oh, sorry, I need to close this and share it. So you should see the results, which show 8% elementary school, 32% middle school, 63% high school, and 5% college. Okay, so a lot of the content we'll be focusing on today is largely at the lower high school level, algebra, geometry. Some of it is appropriate to middle school as well. In elementary school, we often we have activities that are pre-built because it's a little much for students to start from scratch and have access to all these tools and menus we'll talk about. But nonetheless, it should give you some good ideas for using in your classroom. And I see somebody is a physics teacher as well, so that's interesting. Okay, so I think you're back to seeing my screen. Let me know if that's not the case. So I'm going to start with a geometry construction. Before I start that, let me orient you to the Sketchpad window. So this is a blank sketch in Sketchpad. I'm using this on a PC. It looks pretty similar on a Mac. We have some tools here. So this is called the arrow tool or the pointer tool. Point, compass, line tool, which has segment, ray, and line. There's a polygon tool. There's text marker information. I'll talk about those in more depth later. And then we also have some menus across the top that have quite a bit more options in them. And I will go into depth on all of that. Okay, so now I'm going to switch the window I'm showing you for a second. So you all should have access to materials for this webinar in your control panel. There should be a little box that says materials with one downloadable zip file. And so everything I'm going to show you today is in that zip file. I should say most of it is. I'll be extending a bit. And so the first thing I'm going to work through is this properties of rhombuses investigation or activity. So I'm going to use this as a way to introduce you to a lot of the basic tools of Sketchpad, and then we're going to go a little deeper. So this activity is using the property of a rhombus that it's an equilateral quadrilateral in order to construct a rhombus, and then we'll look for some properties and look at some other ways to construct rhombuses. So back to Sketchpad. So with this activity, we're going to start, we're using, again, the property that a rhombus has 4 equal sides. It's an equilateral quadrilateral. Yeah, that's right, equilateral quadrilateral. So I'm going to start here by constructing a circle. So I selected the compass tool. I'm going to click for the center. I'm going to pull out and click to finish my circle. And you can see it's highlighted there. There are lots of display options here, so I can change my display using this display menu. I'm going to change the color of that circle to, let's say, blue. Okay, so right now I have a circle, and I did this because a handy way to build 2 congruent segments is to use a circle because it has all radii congruent. So I will build a radius. I'm selecting my segment tool. I'm clicking on one point, and you see when I hover there, it gets bigger. That's because it's going to select that point. And when I hover, so if I hover here, it's selecting the circle, and then I can make that endpoint attached to the circle. But I'm going to make it right there attached to that point, which is also on the circle. And then I'm just going to construct another one. And now I have 2 segments that are both on this circle, and they are congruent. Okay, to continue with my rhombus construction, I'm going to build this segment. And again, these 2 are congruent. And if I reflect over this line, then I'm going to get another 2 lines out here that are also congruent. So this is just one way to construct a rhombus that gives you 4 congruent segments, making up a quadrilateral. So so far we've dealt with things that are in this tool menu. Now we're going to move to some of these other menus. So transform is what I'm going to use now. I'm going to just select this for a second so you can look at the options. So my options are marking a center. That could be a center of dilation, say, a mirror, so a mirror of reflection, a couple of other options there. And then we can translate, rotate, dilate, or reflect. And you can probably see that some of these are dark black and some of them are grayed out. That's because Sketchpad will always only give you the options that are appropriate at the moment. So right now, I have 1 segment selected right here. There's that 1 segment. And so what I can do with a segment is I can't mark a center because it's not a point. But I can mark it as a mirror because you can reflect things over a center. So I'm going to mark that as a mirror. So now that is my mirror, and what I want to reflect is I want to select that, that, and then I'm going to transform, reflect, and now I have something that looks like a rhombus. Okay, so an excellent thing to do with Sketchpad when you think you've constructed something that is what you want is to do the drag test. So drag your points and see if it is holding the properties you wanted. So we wanted to construct this so that it has 4 congruent sides in a quadrilateral. And no matter what I drag here, that is holding true. Okay. So now I'm going to select, and I should mention that sometimes it can be tricky to be on the right tool at the right time. So if I had accidentally had the segment tool constructed here and I wanted to select this, oops, I'm making a segment. That's not what I wanted to do. So you can always do Edit, Undo, or Control-Z is the shortcut for that. And if you realize you were on the wrong tool, you always want to just go back to the arrow tool if selecting is what you want to be doing. So I'd like to select this, and I'm going to the display menu and choosing hide. Now that's gone, and I still have a rhombus. Okay, so now that we've constructed something that is holding the property of a rhombus, that it has 4 congruent sides. Let's see if we can discover some more properties of a rhombus. So we'll get more into some other menus now. So we know it has 4 congruent sides. Let's also look at slopes. So you measure the slope of segments or lines. So I will select these, go to the Measure menu, and again you can see that just a couple of these are bolded, lengths and slopes. All these other ones are grayed out because I can't measure the coordinates of a line or the arc angle of a line, but I could measure the length, but we know those are all the same because that's how we constructed it. I will measure the slope. Okay, so a lot just happened there. We ended up with 4 slopes here. We also ended up with this grid in the background because a slope is measured on a coordinate system. So if we don't want to see that, we can hide grid. Now I just jumped over to another menu called the Graph menu, and I can hide that grid. That just hid the grid in the background. I can also select more things. I just did a selection rectangle like that, and I can hide some more. Okay, let me just pause for a second and ask about my pacing here. If I'm going too fast in particular, I doubt I'm going too slow, maybe for the advanced people. Okay, I'm getting some goods, but please do tell me if I'm going too fast, because I know there's some beginners here.
Josephine, sorry to,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. Someone was asking earlier about how to get to the materials that are affiliated with this webinar, and I noticed that I didn't have my correct option showing originally. I changed it just a few minutes ago. So can you, in the panel, can you guys let me know if you can see the materials panel now? There's a file in there. It says GSP webinars. Good. All right. Seems like that got solved. Thank you. There's no other questions so far.
Okay, that's excellent. Also, you should have gotten a confirmation email for this webinar about half an hour ago, and I noticed that the zip file was in there as well. Okay, so where am I? So I measured the slope, and you may notice something interesting about the slope here. Notice that it also labeled the lines for us. So there's J, K, J prime, and K prime. Those J prime and K prime are because they're images. Those are the 2 that were reflected. So these are my 2 radii of the circle, and these are the 2 lines that were reflected. They're images. But regardless, it labeled those lines, and it's giving us slope, and we can see that 2 of them seem to be the same here, and another 2 of them seem to be the same. And what we know about slope is that if 2 lines have the same slope, then they are parallel. So let's write one observation of another property of rhombuses that we see here. So I just selected the text tool, and I drew a rectangle to type into, and I'm going to write what I noticed, which is that opposite sides in a parallelogram are parallel. And if we'd like to verify that a little further, we can drag some points, see if it's true for every example, and it is. And let's see what else we can observe. Let's measure angles. So there are a couple of ways to measure angles. One of them is by selecting 3 points in order. So I selected this point, this point, this point. And if I go to Measure Angle, it'll give me the angle between those, and it put it over there. And notice that it also put some letters on there for me so that it could reference that angle. Another way that's pretty nice to measure angles is we can use this marker tool. And if you happen to have been using GSP 4, then this is something that's new in GSP 5. And the marker tool can be used for a lot of things, but we can click and pull in, and it will mark those angles for us. And now if we select those, I've selected 4 angles, and I can measure the angles. I'll delete this other one. I'll move this out of the way. And again, we see a relationship here. These two are the same, and these two are the same. Let's actually mark that on our diagram. So BA' C is congruent to CAB. So I'm going to actually use the marker tool to mark that. So I just clicked again in each of those, and now I have a double angle marker on each one. If I wanted to make these two congruent or mark them congruent, I can do that as well. Okay. Additionally, you can use the marker tool to mark segments. So in this case, maybe I want to mark them all congruent. I know that's true as well. Okay, so back to writing our conjectures. So opposite sides in a parallelogram are parallel, and we also believe that opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. Okay, and another nice thing you can do with this text tool now is that you can actually insert measures or insert elements, objects in your sketch into your argument. So I could say, for example, this angle, CAB, and then I can say is congruent to. So let me draw your attention now down here to the text editing tool. I just clicked here to show a bunch of options I have, and I have a congruent symbol. So congruent to, and now I can click here, that one. And let me make this a little prettier. And now this is hot text, is what we call it. If you hover over it, it highlights, and you can see that in the angle, or in the diagram, that angle is highlighting as well. So when I hover over CAB, this angle over here is lighting up as well. So CAB is congruent to BAC. So this is a pretty great thing to do if you're doing demonstrations, and it's also excellent for students if you're having students do their own work, and then write up arguments. Maybe you'll have them do presentations. Maybe you just want them to write out their work or their conjectures. This is a great tool for doing that. It makes presenting arguments a lot easier. It also is just kind of exciting. Okay, so we've established a couple more properties of rhombuses based on what we've done. Let's just do one more thing before I move on. Let's draw some diagonals. So I'm constructing segments. And again, when you're on something that you want to attach to, it'll light up. And there I am again, accidentally on the wrong tool. I didn't want to draw another segment, so Control-Z will make it go away. Back to the arrow tool. And if I drag some of these now, you might be able to make some conjectures about diagonals. And if we had unlimited time, I would make some measurements. But I imagine you can guess that the diagonals bisect each other. Also that they bisect the angles, and also that we're perpendicular. The plural of rhombus, rhombi. I think, yeah, both are correct. Thanks, Angela. Okay, so there's a couple of properties of diagonals of rhombi that you could also work with. Okay, so using some of what we've just discovered, I'm going to take a look at another activity, a follow-up activity to this. And I'll switch my screen that I'm showing here. So the next activity that you might do with students is this one, constructing rhombuses. And this is a pretty wide open exploration that asks how many ways can you come up with to construct a rhombus. And so you would use some of the properties that you figured out in that last activity. So I'm going to show you a couple that will introduce you to some additional tools that we haven't looked at yet. And then we'll move on to algebra. Before I do that, any questions that have come up or any further comments on my pacing or anything?
You're doing great. There have been no questions that have come up that you haven't already addressed, other than I've had a couple of people ask about whether the thing that you've provided will work in Sketchpad 4 and whether the stuff that you're doing on the screen can be done in Sketchpad 4. And so far I've just said that you can pretty much do everything except for everything that you did with the hot text and the angle and the marker tool is specific to Sketchpad 5. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The hot text is a new feature, and using the markers is a new feature. You can work through all the steps in the worksheet. You just can't do some of these new things that are more about display. When I get into this polygon tool, that's something that's new in Sketchpad 5 as well, and that's kind of a nice shortcut to constructing polygons. But the activities that I distributed will work with Sketchpad 4 as well.
Can you show how to make the parallel markings?
I sure can. So, Andres, maybe you know a quicker way to do this, but the way I know to do this is to select your mark, and let's see, it's in the properties. So you can change the properties of your tick mark to, instead of being a crossbar, which is what we have, to being an open arrow or a hollow arrow or a solid arrow. And so now that one, and if I keep clicking it, let's see, I need to use the marker tool. If I want to make it a double arrow or a triple arrow or a quadruple arrow, and then back to one. So I could select each of these, and instead of using the whatever that's called, the sort of mark that shows congruence, I could switch it to an arrow mark instead. Andres, do you know a shorter way to do that?
Well, there's two things. One thing is you can have both marks on the same segment. You don't have to change one and replace it. You can have both the tick marks for congruency and then create a new tick mark for parallel lines. And the shortcut is just to right-click. Anytime you right-click on an object, you can get the properties quicker.
Brilliant. Okay, that's a really great tip. I've been using a PC for a year, but I still forget about right-click, and it's probably Control-click on a Mac, right?
Yeah, and I never do it myself, but it's actually pretty great because it takes you straight to just the menu options that are available for that object.
So if I wanted to mark this and this as parallel, I could mark them, I could select them, and let's see if I can change them both at the same time. No, but...
Oh, yeah, you don't even have to go to properties, right? It's just, it's on that right there.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm right-clicking.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so now I've marked these two. If I want to make that a double... Oh, it's not working. Oh, because I'm not on the marker tool. I can make those both a double mark. Okay, I see a couple of other questions. Is there a handout specific to hot text? I expect there's probably some good information about it in the help system. The help system is an excellent thing to know about, and I'll just take a moment to talk about that. So here in help, there's a learning center. This, again, some of this is new in Sketchpad 5. So if you have Sketchpad 4, you won't have this learning center. It has videos. It has some, using Sketchpad has some tutorials, and teaching with Sketchpad has some activities. The reference center, though, is where I was going. And unlike some other reference centers you'll see, or help systems you'll see with other software, our reference center will actually help you quite a bit. So I bet that if you go to the reference center and open that, that you can do a search for hot text, and that there will be lots of information there. I'll go back to that at the end if we have more time.
Yeah, I would strongly suggest that people look at the tutorials, and the Learning Center. Tutorial number 3 pretty much explains how to work with hot text. Great. I'll write that in the chat panel.
Good idea. Okay, so moving right along, I'm going to go back to my arrow tool. And so now I'm going to explore a couple of other ways of building rhombuses using other tools that we haven't seen yet. And as I do that, I'm going to show you another good trick. So in the File menu here, I can always open a new sketch. But if you've seen Sketchpad before, you might have seen some sketches that have multiple pages. So if you'd like to just add a new page to your sketch, you can do that in File, Document Options. That gives you this pop-up window. I'm going to add a blank page. Andres, you can see the pop-up, right?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I can.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure it was in the window and being displayed. So you can select a blank page, click OK, and now you can see I'm on a blank page that's labeled 2. In that same spot, I could have changed these to have text names if I wanted to. So page 1 still has what I had before. Page 2 is now blank. Okay, so another way to construct rhombuses that uses the property that there are 4 equal sides. This actually isn't going to show you any new tools, but it will show you a property of constructions. So let me undo that and go a little more slowly. So I selected the circle tool. I built a circle. Now I'm going to build another circle with this point as the center and this point as defining the radius of my circle. And now again, circles, all of their radii are congruent, and because these are 2 congruent circles, both of them have congruent radii. So now I'm going to show you the polygon tool. So I lied. I am showing you something new. So this one is an interior without the edges really shown. This one is the interior with the edges shown, and this one just shows the edges without the interior shaded. This one is my personal favorite, but there are cases where you might want to use different ones. And I'll click here for one side. Here, this is a little funny because my circles are red, so you can't exactly see the highlighting so well, but right now one circle is highlighted. Right now both of them are highlighted. So that point was constructed at the intersection. Another point, I'm just moving my mouse, clicking again on that intersection, and then right here to finish my polygon, I have to click back in the middle again, or at the starting point again. Okay, so ta-da, I have a rhombus. And I can do the drag test again. There's something a little odd about my rhombus, though. It is indeed a rhombus, but does anybody see anything comment-worthy about it? Anyone? It's fixed. What do you mean by fixed? There is something that's fixed about it. It's true. It can move around. It can become different size rhombuses, rhombi, formed by 2 equilateral triangles. Exactly. Exactly. So because this is constructed between 2 circles, so this is congruent and this is congruent, and also this, oops, this is another radii of the circle, so that too is congruent. So we have 2 equilateral triangles put together there. So that means that this rhombus is indeed a rhombus, but sometimes it's called over-constrained. It's not giving you the possibility of all possible rhombuses. It's just giving you the rhombuses that have angles of 60 degrees and 120 degrees. Okay, I think, look at that. I've got my segment tool going again. I'm going to delete that. Switch to my arrow tool, and I'm just going to delete this whole thing. So I'm dragging a big old selection rectangle to select everything. And I'm hitting backspace to delete. Those were sort of some shortcuts, but you can also do select all and then cut would be another way of getting rid of things. Okay, so just one more thing on rhombi, and then we'll move along to algebra. So I'm going to use the property that diagonals of a rhombus bisect each other to construct another rhombus a different way using properties of rhombuses that we discovered on page 1 and introduce you to some more tools in the construct menu. So I'm going to make a segment. Back to my arrow tool. Let me show you also, if I select the text tool and I click on these points, do you see when right now that little finger hand is white? Right now it's dark. That means it's it's hovering over and will label that point. And here's another point. So there's a way to add labels quickly if you'd like to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use that property that we saw about the diagonals, where the diagonals of a rhombus bisect each other. They're also perpendicular. So I'm going to build a midpoint on this. And so to do that, I need to, in order to build a midpoint, it has to be a midpoint of something, and that something is generally a segment. So I'm going to select that segment, and I will construct a midpoint. And you see here I have two options. There's point on a segment, and there's midpoint. I want a midpoint. So this thing is now constructed to be a midpoint. No matter what I do, it's always a midpoint. And now let's build a perpendicular line through that midpoint. So in order to build a perpendicular, you need two things. You need a point, and you need a line, because you want a perpendicular through that point and perpendicular to that line. Now let me show you. If I just selected the line there and I tried to construct a perpendicular, I can't, because I haven't selected enough child objects, enough objects to define that perpendicular line. So I need that point, construct perpendicular line. There we have it. And again, if I drag, it's always perpendicular. I'm just going to take this opportunity to show you the information tool. Again, this is Sketchpad 5 only. If I click this and then I click on something, for example, this line, line 10, see it highlights if I hover, is perpendicular to AB. It also highlights there through midpoint 14. So it's showing you what is defining this line. It's defined by this line that it's perpendicular to and the point that it passes through. If I were to instead select this point, point A is independent. I just put it there, and I used it to draw a segment. Same thing with point B, but if we look at this segment, AB was constructed to connect point A and point B. Yes, this is indeed the perpendicular bisector. And now to finish up a rhombus, I'm going to use the circle tool, and we could stop there, but then we'd end up with a constrained rhombus. If I attach it to this line, and then I use the polygon tool again, let me actually use the point tool for a second, since I haven't shown that yet. I'm going to construct another point here. Again, both things are highlighted, so that's constructing the intersection. And for those of you using Sketchpad 4, I will show you another way to build that rhombus, build the polygon. So again, I could use the polygon tool, but I can also do it by building all of these segments, and then let's see, hopefully I'll do this right. Actually, I haven't done this in a while. I think if I construct if I select the 4 lines and construct interior, hopefully this will work. Uh-oh, it didn't work. Okay, so I forgot how to do that because I haven't used Sketchpad 4 in a while. So let's instead, there is a very simple way to do it. I'm just not remembering it at the moment. So there we have that. And one more great trick is that if I just want to show my rhombus now, I can select all these other things that are not part of my rhombus. I could go to Display Hide and make them all invisible. But I can also go to Edit and make an action button that hides and shows things. So now I just made this button, and if I press it, it hides everything. If I show it, it shows again. And so that's kind of a handy way to be able to construct something. Looks like a square right there, but it's not. And by pressing a show button, it will then show you the things that you did in order to construct it, or the sort of parent objects. Okay, any questions or comments before I move on? Andres, do we have any questions pop up?
No, people like the segment tool. I mean, sorry, the information tool. There was a question about, I wasn't quite sure I understood it. Is there a way of showing part of a, you know, is there a way to cut the line, such as establish a point and erase the lines outside the area of focus? Not really sure what that one means. There is another question I just started replying to. Veronica was asking, sometimes I've wanted to find other properties of objects, such as coordinates of points, and it only tells me they're independent objects. So I was about to explain that coordinates of points is not a property of the object. It's a measurement. And you can, a property of an object is really what defines it. And if something is originally defined as an independent point that can be moved anywhere in the plane, that's its property. That cannot be changed.
Okay. Payush is challenging me to construct an equilateral triangle without using circles. But I am going to move on to algebra, because I'm sure that some of you want to see that. I also saw somebody say lovely sketch, and that reminded me that I actually don't think this brown is particularly lovely. I do like the color brown, but I do want to just remind you or point out that there are a lot of different display options here. So you can change color of something if you like. You can also often right-click on things and get properties. And I could change the opacity there and make it more pale or more dark, more see-through or not as desired. So a lot of times if you're wanting to modify something, a lot of times right-clicking or control-clicking will give you properties that will let you do that. Okay, let's move on to an algebra example. I'm going to go File, New Sketch. And I'm going to very loosely be working through this worksheet that is in your, that I'll show you in a second, that's in your materials. I'm actually going to be making some modifications to this to show you some additional functionality, but if you are trying to work through things and reproduce them later, you can work with this activity that you have. And now back to Sketchpad. Okay, so starting from scratch again, because that's what this webinar is about, I'm going to investigate plotting a line in slope-intercept form, and I'm going to check out some properties of that. So I'm going to use hot text just to make a little note here. We're investigating the slope-intercept form, and I'll call that y, and of this particular line, y equals 2x plus 1. So to plot something, we can use the graph menu. So once you're getting into algebra, you will sometimes be using these menus over to the right a little more than the ones at the left, although there's plenty of crossover, and you'll see that in a second. But I'm going to start with the graph menu. And I could define a coordinate system. I could do a grid form. So Sketchpad has a lot of algebra properties, lots of things it can do with algebra. You could select a polar grid, square grid, or rectangular, or trigonometric. So the difference between square and rectangular is square is always going to have your x and y units the same. Rectangular, those will be independently modifiable. So I'll select square here now. I have 2 control points, so I think I'll just move my origin. You could move this to scale as well, and you can move your numbers here to scale those also. I think I'll actually select and hide these 2 points so they're not confusing us. So display, hide, move this. So we want to look at the slope-intercept form of a line, and this is often one of the first forms that students are looking at when they're learning about linear equations or linear functions. And the typical way to think about graphing this is to graph the y-intercept, 1, and then to use the rise over run to plot the next point. So the y-intercept here is the point where x equals 0. And we can use that equation and plug in 0 and see that 0, 1 is a point on the line. And since I've been an editor for a long time, I like to make things pretty in italic. And you can do that using your text menu. Certainly not necessary, but it's another thing to show you. So to plot the y-intercept, I can go to Graph again, and let's just take a moment to look at the options. So I can hide the grid. I showed you that before. I can make a dotted grid. So instead of having the grid lines in the back, I could just have grid dots. Snap points will be if you're constructing points using that point tool, it will automatically snap to the grid. Plotting value on an axis, I could plot a number that's attached to the x-axis or the y-axis. What I'm going to do now is plot points. I'm going to plot the y-intercept 0, 1. You can also make a table and plot it. You could plot a new function. You could plot a parametric curve. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. So this is the example of plot value. So I could plot 0.5 on axis x. Actually, I could do this, right? I could plot the value 1. How do I modify that? I've never used this option before, and I don't know how to modify it, so I'm going to cancel that. Graph, plot points, 0, 1. I want these rectangular, not polar. And there, I've plotted it. I could continue and plot a series of points if I wanted to, but I'm going to be done there. And now I will use the next thing that we generally know about slope-intercept form, which is that the slope is rise 2 over run 1. I'll use this fraction option here. So 2 over 1. And so to get my next point, I could calculate what it is by adding 2 and adding 1. But I'm going to use the transform menu. So I've selected the point. I don't want to mark it as a center. What I want to do is translate it. It gives me a polar option, but I want rectangular. I'm going to do horizontal 1, vertical 2, and I'll translate. So I've done rise 2, run 1. The point is still selected, so I could go do that again. It will remember my same options, so I could translate again. And that's generally when you're plotting by hand, that's what you're doing, right? That's what students are doing when they're first graphing lines, is they're going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. And then we can draw a line through those. So we can select 2 points. I'm going to select that line tool instead of the segment tool. I didn't actually need to select those 2 points, right? I can just do it like that. And we can confirm that, in fact, that goes to the third point as well. And if we were to do another translate of up 2 over 1, it would also go to that point. OK, so that's one way of just building a line that goes to the points. I am going to delete that because I want to show you how to plot a function. So I can plot a function, and I can just type my equation in there. Now we've verified, really, that y equals 2x plus 1, in fact, does go through that. I'm going to make my line a little heavier using the display menu again. And this says f of x. I'm imagining that I'm a Algebra 1 student, so maybe I don't like that. I just double-clicked to open this edit function, and I'm going to change that to y equals notation. You can change that in your settings as well. So y equals 2x plus 1. OK, if we want to explore more lines than just this one, y equals 2x plus 1, I can use a parameter. So from the number menu, I have a couple of options. I have new parameter, which is what I want. I'm going to choose a new parameter and make it m for slope, or some of you might prefer a for slope, or b for slope. You can calculate, so there's a calculator in Sketchpad. You can tabulate, so if you're measuring values, you can make a table of them. You can also do a new function. So a new parameter is what I want. and I want to call it m. And so now I have this parameter, m is 1, but it's not doing anything. I could change it, so I can click on this, and I'm clicking plus on my keyboard, and it's making it go up by 0.1. And as I said before, if you want to change the properties of something, often right-clicking will do that for you. So you can select properties, and if you want it to go by whole numbers, you can do that, or tenths, you can do that. But I'm going to double-click my function here, and I'm going to actually change that slope to be m instead. Okay, so it changed, so now it's 2.6x plus 1. And if I want to see what happens, I can select this. So I've clicked on it to select, and now I'm hitting plus on my keyboard, and I can see what happens to the line as I increase m, the slope, or I can hit minus and move it down. I could even animate it if I wanted to. And if you have the very latest release of Sketchpad, which is 5.04, and if you own Sketchpad, you can download that update for free, you can do a thing that we call flickrementing. And I'll show you that. So what I do is I click here and I drag down, or I click here and I, click here and I drag up. You got to be a little fast. Where this gets really fun is if you have an interactive whiteboard, or if you're using Sketchpad Explorer for the iPad. That's where this gets really fun, because then you can just take your finger, stick it in that box, and drag your finger up or your finger down, and you can be modifying the parameter like that. So when you're using a mouse and a screen like me, it's not quite so exciting, but you, again, click, drag, and it's changing by tenths. It's changing by tenths, and that's a part of the properties as well. You could change it, you could modify it to change by something else. I thought I just saw a question. What is that tool? So again, it's called flickrementing. That's a term we invented, and it's part of Sketchpad 5.04, which is the very latest release. It came out about 2 weeks ago, and if you have Sketchpad 5 already, you can just download that update, and it'll update you with the new version that has that. And I also mentioned Sketchpad Explorer for the iPad. If you have an iPad, or if your students do, that's a free app. That's like a Sketchpad player, and that works great on the iPad, just using your finger to push and drag up or down. Okay, so moving right along. Andres, I feel like I just saw a flurry of stuff going on there. Were there any questions that I should be addressing?
There's a question of whether you can enter a fraction instead of a decimal. And I'm not sure about that.
I think the answer is yes, but I think you need to answer that one. Is it a property? You don't know?
No, I'm saying I don't think fractions are displayed. I mean, I don't think, I mean, the problem is with a parameter. A parameter continuously changes through a whole range of values, so therefore it cannot be a fraction. It has to be, you know, you set it by some.
I see your point, right.
Yeah, so there are some custom tools you can use, and there's some models that have been developed that specifically are fraction friendly, where basically the numerator and the denominator of a fraction are each a separate parameter. But that's that's a prepared model. It's not just a native functionality. But I think it's also important for teachers to think about the fact why you cannot have a continuously changing value take on fraction form.
Okay, that was deep. Thanks. Okay, and last thing on this particular model is I just want to show you that in Sketchpad 5 you can also plot a family of functions. So to do that, I'm selecting a parameter, and I'm selecting the line, and I want to show a family of these lines with different parameters. And so construct family of functions, and it just showed me a whole bunch of lines with different values for m. You can change the domain, so maybe I want the domain to go from -10 to 10, and maybe I want to have 21, so that will give me -10, -9, -8, etc. And there we have it. So this is a family of functions. It's the family of functions y equals mx plus 1. going from -10 to 10. There's the -10 one here, probably. Oops, hard to select that one. And you could go ahead again. Gotta be fast with this. And I can drag my parent line there, and maybe I want to stop it there, so I can see that that's the line with m equals -1. And maybe I'll just hit my minus button now, so I have a little more control. And so that's the one with a slope of -2. So you can ask some questions of your students, like, which one has a slope of 0? And I think it's also interesting to think about, why are the lines closer together up here than the ones are down here? Okay.
Josephine?
Yep.
So there's another question. There's a question, is there any way to have the value for m appear in the function instead of the variable? And so did you, I didn't quite catch, the y equals mx plus 1 that you have on your screen, is that the function, or is that
That's
a hot
the
text?
function.
Okay.
That's
So
the function. So I could change this to say the slope is that, and I could change it here to say the slope is that, and now those are hot text values. So now these are being modified to be the function. Now this is the thing that's actually defining the function, and the function is defined by mx plus 1, not by -2x plus 1 constantly changing. So I can change it in my hot text so that it's being modified, and now if I change that, I'm getting really into the flickermanning thing now, then these values will change as well. And that is, so parameters are something that is in GSP4, but the hot text, again, this linked text, is new in GSP5. Families of functions, I believe, is also a new feature in GSP5. So, I'm sorry if that sounds discouraging. I do encourage you to upgrade, but much of the stuff, in fact, all of the activities that I've given you today work just fine in GSP4, but there are some added nice new features.
Okay. I'll just make a quick plug for upgrading to 5. I mean, first of all, you can all download Sketchpad 5 for free, and you should do that just so you can play with it and see what it can do. But, Sketchpad 4 came out over 10 years ago, and to survive as a company, every once in a while, we do need people to upgrade. Just putting it out there. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, one more good trick. So I will do a new sketch again. And I want to show you one more thing that you can do to explore functions with parameters. We're going to look at another, I'm just going to do point slope form, not that it really matters. It could be anything. Oh, and I see that we're getting short on time, so I will make this really quick. So this is a formula that has a few parameters. M, H, and K are things that we might want to vary. And you could create parameters, go number a new parameter, and make a new parameter for each of those. But it can also be cool to have a slider. So instead of manually changing the values and seeing what they are, you can grab them and slide them. And I'll show you how to do that. So you do that by making a line. Here's another trick. See, this line can point any direction you want, but if I hold my Shift key, it's going to jump in 15-degree increments. I think that's 15. So if I want it to be perfectly straight like that, I can hold my Shift key. Oh, no, I just messed it up. There, did it again. And to make a slider, you can put a point in between those two. And then with it selected, you can measure the value of that point. And what that did is it's giving you point C on line AB. It's measuring the ratio of this distance to this distance. So the ratio of AC to AB, right now it's 0.6. But you can see if I slide it, it varies between 0 and 1, and then it can go bigger too, and it can go into negatives as well. And I can now hide some of these things. So I'm going to hide those objects. I'm going to make another little segment between them. I'm going to call this, with my text tool selected, double-clicking. I'm going to call it M. And then I will I don't want to show that label. Oh, and maybe I want that to be M as well. So now if I slide this, my value of M is changing. I'm going to move this up a little bit. And you can just duplicate to make some more sliders as well. So I'm doing Control-C to copy because I'm trying to move a little fast here. But you can also do Edit Copy. And I can copy that again. Oops. Didn't have everything selected there. And let's change this one now with the text tool. If I double click, I can call that H. I don't really have these properly linked. I'll just hide those values. So I have M, H, and K. And now if I just want to quickly plot a new function, I can do M times X minus, oops, times, parentheses, X minus H, outside parentheses, plus K. I can plot that. I have a line. And now if I move these things, it's affecting my function. Okay, and I'm going to pause there. Any more questions? Throw some quick questions out there if you want to. I do want to also orient you one more time to the Learning Center. There are tutorials there. Working through some of those tutorials will help you out a lot with beginning constructions. There's also the Reference Center, which is like help, and if you need to know how to build a slider, the instructions are in there. You can just do a quick search for slider, and there's great instructions there. And I also want to let you know that in teaching with Sketchpad, there's lots of activities there, and a lot of the ones in the geometry section in particular start with constructing from scratch. But there are activities for elementary, middle school, algebra, geometry, pre-calculus and calculus, and something else I'm forgetting. Anyway, all the areas you might want to be teaching. Calculus and beyond as well.
Josephine, did you intend to switch over to the Learning Center because it's still showing your
Sketchpad window? No, because I will. We're short on time, and it's going to open up a different application. So it was just going to take me an extra second to get there, but I shall. So this opens up in a browser, but it is a local file. So tutorials, Reference Center, sample activities are all things that you can check out, a few videos to help you get started if you need some more support. And I'll also just quickly mention that we have these free webinars every Tuesday. We also have these all archived at keypress.com/webinars. There are dozens, if not more, of them archived if you want to go a little deeper or check out some other topics. And if you really want to go deep, we also have 6-week moderated online courses. And I think there's one starting up in just a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks from now, approximately. Don't quote me on that. You can check out keypress.com/online courses for that.
There's a question from Evangeline that I was just about to answer in the chat panel, but flickermenting is part of the very latest release of GSP5. I'll put that in the window.
And I'm typing in some of those URLs. Also, at keypress.com/webinars, there's all the archives. There will also be an archive of this one posted in just a couple of days. So if you feel a need to watch this again and refresh some of those tips, you are welcome to do so. Thank you so much, guys. Any last questions? We'll stay on for a few minutes, so if you have some specific questions, you can ask us. If not, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, Josephine. That was a great presentation, and thank you all for joining us this evening. If you have any last questions, you can ask them right now. We'll be on for a couple of minutes, and then after that we'll be ending this. You'll be receiving an email that will allow you to access the resources if you still need to get them, as well as the recording of the webinar. And once again, we do this every Tuesday, and next week we will have the developer of Tinkerplots, Cliff Canold, will be presenting on covariation, exploring covariation with Tinkerplots. And thank you for all the positive thank yous that are coming our way in the chat panel. Appreciate that. Again, thanks, Josephine. And I think I'll say good night.